Hi and welcome to Potted History. Today I'm at Chatsworth in Derbyshire. It's the home of the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire. Now it's a place that's steeped in history, and I must say it's one of the grandest country houses in the land. Now Chatsworth is strongly linked with the plant that we're going to be looking at in today's programme, and that's the orchid. We often think of the orchid as one of the most elite of the plant kingdom, perhaps more associated with the rich and the privileged, but it's not the case at all. They really are quite easy plants to grow, even for the complete beginner. I'm going to meet one right now. Chris, tell me, why the fascination for orchids?
Well, just recently I've been on a trip to India and I saw them growing down there, plenty of these wild orchids, and I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. And, you know, I really fancied the chance of doing it here, so...
Yeah, so they grow like a weed out there, do they, or...?
Just about, yes, it's subtropical, and they really, really look sensational.
Yeah, where were they growing? What sort of location?
They put them on the side of coconut trees. They just get a half coconut, put them on the side of these trees. I really like to try my hand at growing these orchids, and you know, have you got any ideas of doing this?
It's the thing, you get excited when you go abroad and you want to come back and grow them at home. Now we've obviously got native orchids in this country which grow in the woodlands, but the exotic ones that you saw need certain light levels and of course certain temperatures, and a bit warmer than we've got today. So the thing is to contain them, I think, in their own greenhouse. We've got a greenhouse at home?
Not yet, but planning on it.
Good, because I'm going to show you how to do one. Let's do that now. Now, the great thing about growing a collection of plants, whether it's cacti, houseplants, orchids, whatever, in their own environment, is that you can really steer things to the perfect conditions that they need, humidity-wise and light-wise. Now, Chatsworth have kindly given us this plot to do a bit of a demonstration area. So is this going to fit in with your garden, do you think?
Well, it should do, really. I think somewhat smaller scale, you know, in my garden for this one. It's absolutely fantastic.
Now, tell me about your garden. Have you got room for a big greenhouse, small, or...?
I would say a sort of a medium-sized greenhouse. But, you know, I'm struggling really on the southerly aspect. That's the only bit that really worries me. Right.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, most people recommend the greenhouses go north to south, full sun.
Yeah.
But in your case, because you've got the orchids, they don't actually want full sun, so it's probably a benefit that you've got some shade there anyway, yeah?
Oh, that's lucky.
Yeah, it is, actually. Now, construction-wise, there's different types of greenhouses you can use. Now, the one that we've got here is it's a pine, it's a southern pine, softwood. It's been treated, it's going to last for many, many years. You could also use cedar wood as well, which would be lovely. They're a lot more expensive, but cedar wood doesn't need treating. And of course the traditional aluminium, which are functional, but I think they look a little bit ugly, don't you?
I think so, certainly for where I live,
Yeah, so something like this would be ideal. Now a small greenhouse like this really is quite easy to put up, and with a couple of friends you can put this up in a day. Now unfortunately today we've got a lot to do. We're going to learn a little bit later on about the history of orchids, so we're going to need some special help. All right guys. Right.
Oh, thank you.
I presume that's part of the base, is it? Right, got a bit of level ground over there. Let's go.
Up to now, England had been the graveyard of orchids. People brought these orchids in from all over the world. They put them into houses which were far too hot, far too steamy, terribly uncomfortable to work in, and they all died. But Paxton and Gibson, having seen where they grew, decided that they wanted fresh air. So they not very hot, it was comfortable to live in, comfortable for the gardeners, and the orchids thrived. It was a wonderful place. Not only the best structure, but the best functioning greenhouse. And from this concept, modern orchid growing has come of age.
So where can we see orchids now here?
There's a small collection here belonging to the present Duke of Devonshire.
It's certainly a slightly scaled down version from the glories of the past, isn't it, here?
I'm afraid it is, but that's what life's like now. People have small collections of orchids now, which they grow for decoration. And like these beautiful plants here, that belonging to the Duke of Devonshire, they're brought into the house, really for dinner table decoration, sitting room decoration, and that's what they're grown for nowadays.
Now, way back in ancient history, there wasn't the use of them at all, was it?
Oh no, they were of use, but they had a medicinal use. And the earliest records of them are from China, where one of the emperors wrote a book in the 28th century before Christ on the value of orchids for medicinal purposes. Platilla and dendrobiums he mentioned.
And that continued on through history in different countries?
It did, and the first reference we have to this in Europe is from Greece in about 250 BC, when Theophrastus described the medicinal value of plants. And he named orchids as orchis, which is the Greek word for testicle, because the tubers of the orchids, the underground parts, look like the male testicle. And people believed, even up to Shakespeare's time, that if a man ate the new tubers of an orchis, this would give him male children. And if a woman ate the old tubers of an orchis, she would then bear female children.
I assume there's nothing in there at all.
I'm afraid completely utter rubbish.
Well, Chris, that humble greenhouse, not quite on par with Paxton's great conservatory, but they say small is beautiful, and it's looking pretty damn good in there at the moment.
Well, I've only just placed these in here just to get them out of the chill.
Looks absolutely fine. I see you've done well with the shopping list. Haven't got the eggs though, have you?
No, I certainly haven't. But these carpets do intrigue me. That's what I actually do for a living, selling these. So what on earth are we supposed to be doing with those?
All will be revealed a little bit later on, Chris. We've got all the ingredients to keep our orchids happy. I'm going to show you exactly what to do with these after the break. See you in a minute.
This unique 18th century hunting lodge has a recently vandalised fireplace, glassless windows and a fully collapsible roof. No, nothing's that bad. With a lorry load of stone and the help of experts, it'll be as good as new. Rebuilding these four walls this morning at 10:30 on Discovery Home and Leisure.
She simply can't resist the must-have taste of the Colonel's secret recipe.
Now you could cut the cost of buying a brand new fitted kitchen by calling Kitchens Direct. Kitchens Direct aims to give you extra value and extra savings because it has no showrooms and no middlemen. Instead, you deal direct with an expert team of designers, fitters and highly skilled craftsmen to give you a complete kitchen service at an amazing price. So call Kitchens Direct now on 0800 123 321 and we'll send you a free copy of our brochure as well as information about current offers. Call 0800 123 321. Kitchens Direct. Why pay more than you have to?
Clover has an unbeatable taste because it's churned with fresh dairy ingredients, so...
From Sunsweet Prunes comes Sunsweet Prune Juice. 100% pure juice. Try Sunsweet. Enjoy life feeling good.
Hi, I'm Hank Parker, and this is the trout fishing game from Radica. And if you like fishing, this is it. You cast like you're really fishing. Jerk to set the hook and reel them in. The game shakes when you hook them. Man, you can feel that trout right on your line. Now, I'm a pro, and I'm telling you, this is the real thing.
Dad, I caught that 25-pounder.
Boy, is wearing me out. Lake trout fishing. Feel the trout on the line. Also deep sea and junior fishing from Radica.
To arrange an appointment and take advantage of our free no-obligation design service, call Kitchens Direct now on 0800 123 321.
Welcome back. And in a little while we're going to be rejoining our orchid expert, Dr. Henry Oakley, and he's going to be telling us about the Victorian orchid craze. First though, we've got a bit of work to do here, Chris.
Okay.
Now, whenever you're choosing orchids for your greenhouse, we've got to remember where they come from, because obviously they all need different conditions, yeah? Now, some grow in trees, which are called epiphytic orchids, like the Phalaenopsis here, and those flowers are absolutely stunning.
Yeah, fantastic, those.
Gorgeous, isn't it? Now, if you look down here at the roots, we can see these are all coming through here, ending up into the compost below, which in fact isn't really compost at all. If you look at that, all it is bark chippings, a little bit of peat and nothing much else. Now, they don't need a lot of goodness, so it's wrong to pot orchids up into normal compost.
Right.
They really do not need that sort of condition. Now, this one would normally be going on the tree, similar to probably to the ones that you saw in India.
Yeah.
So the crucial thing is drainage, no fertiliser, use the right compost. Also with this one, it's a temperature thing. It doesn't like to be below about 55 degrees.
Right. Brilliant.
Now, other ones which are much tougher are things like the Cymbidium. Now, this one doesn't look quite as glamorous, no flowers on it unfortunately, but the leaves look so healthy. We all wonder why when I take it out the pot. Look at that. Isn't that incredible? There's nothing there at all, and it still seems to look quite healthy. Now, this one is one that grows on the ground. It's a terrestrial orchid that needs a different sort of compost and a slightly different care. Now, this one will almost take frosty conditions, so you can leave them outside in the summer, and just as it's getting cold in the autumn, bring them inside, and that'll flower next year. Nice one, that, isn't it? Another tough one is the little Diza here, and as you can look here, we can see it's even more composty. That's just pretty much peat chunks, and again, a terrestrial ground-dwelling orchid. Another tough one. Now, the thing to remember about orchids is humidity as well. They must have a lot of humidity. Now, Chris, you wondered earlier about the carpet.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah?
It intrigues me.
Well, it's not really for decoration, even though a shag pile in the greenhouse might be quite nice. Maybe in a tone of green with some flowers on there.
Lovely.
But the idea is you put water on this, absorbs the moisture, and it releases the humidity for your greenhouse.
How will I know the exact humidity levels?
We want about 70 or 80% humidity. And you can use a little humidity indicator here, and this is telling us even out here it's about 70%. So it's important to get that right in the greenhouse.
All right.
Now, temperature-wise, have you thought about heating your place?
I guess I'm going to need some electric heating. I think that's the only one I can use in my greenhouse. But I'm a little bit concerned about the safety aspect of it.
That's right. Well, electrical heaters, as you say, you've got to be careful with the moisture and electricity. So get a professional in. You could always use steaming heaps of manure, which they used to use in the Victorian times. But I'm sure the electrical option is probably a better one for you.
Right.
Now, use a maximum minimum thermometer to make sure that the temperature doesn't go below a certain level for some of the orchids which do need warmer conditions. If you don't actually want to heat the greenhouse, you could bring the delicate ones in the house at the worst part of the winter. Now, greenhouse shading, another important thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, now yours is in semi-shade anyway, so it's not quite so important.
No.
But we need to think about shading on a day like this when you get a lot of hot sun coming through at certain parts of the day. It's important to use something on the glass to protect it from the sun, because too hot is even worse than too cold.
Right.
Can you give us a hand putting this on the greenhouse?
I certainly will.
And the beauty of the wooden greenhouse is that you can actually use these drawing pins to attach it to the wooden frame. That's it. Keep going all the way along.
Right.
Now, if we find that there's not enough shading here, which in a full sun aspect could be the case, we can actually use a whitewash on the outside of the glass, which does give it a denser shading and will be much better for some of the plants. Now you're getting on so well with that, Chris. I'm going to leave you to finish that. A little bit later on I'm going to show you how to repot orchids. First though, I'm going to find out a bit more about the history. See you in a minute. So as we were saying earlier, Paxton really was the catalyst of the craze in orchid collecting in the Victorian times.
That's right. And lots of other rich and famous people joined in the craze. The Schroders, the Rothschilds, and they all vied among each other to get the newest, the most beautiful orchids from the New World and the Old. They went to auctions, paid hundreds of pounds, even thousands of pounds for the latest plant. And from this, all the nurserymen used to send out people round the world to collect orchids. And Frederick Sander, the orchid king, with his huge nurseries in England and in Belgium, sent out 20 collectors round the world to collect plants to fuel this craze. Because these plants were valuable, the collectors would collect everything they could. They would destroy whole forests to collect the orchids in them, and also to make sure that none of the other collectors got them either. They would cut down 4,000 trees to collect 10,000 orchids.
That's true.
And there was one orchid collector who on one trip brought back more than 20 tons of orchids. There was another collection just of one species from Guatemala. 100,000 plants of Lycaste skinneri were brought back into this country and sold off at this time at bulk prices, £2.50 for 100 plants.
Which all must have died off fairly shortly afterwards, I dare say.
And I'm afraid they did.
Terrible, isn't it?
But there were good points to this. Not all the collectors were bad people. Some people were conservers. And one of them, Carl Roble, a collector for Sander, had been sent out to the Philippines to look for a rare purple orchid. He couldn't find it anywhere. And he was lying asleep in the hut one night when there was an earthquake, and the whole hut collapsed around him. And he woke up in a shock, looked up through the hole in the roof, and there in the light was this wonderful purple orchid of Vanda. He was delighted. He brought it back to great acclaim. But was it named after him? Not a chance. It was named after his boss. Isn't it always the way? Vanda Sanderian.
That's a lovely story, that one. So tell me, when was the end of the great orchid mania?
It all really started to come to an end with the First World War. The gardeners went off to the war and very few came back. And then when they came back, all the big orchid collections had perished. There'd been nobody to look after them for 4 or 5 years. Orchids then took off again for a little while in the 1920s. But it wasn't the same, and the big glass house here was eventually had to be destroyed. It had fallen into neglect and ruin. And Paxton's grandson, I understand, blew it up to destroy it.
So nowadays, where's the best place to see orchids?
Now you see orchids being grown as hybrids in commercial nurseries around the country, in Holland, and particularly in new developing countries like Thailand, and also, of course, in North America.
And in the wild?
In the wild, most of the habitats have been destroyed. 80% of the world's forests have disappeared since the end of the last war. And so you can still see them in the wild, but it's usually 5 hours driving off track and then 5 hours walking.
Oh, Chris, you've done a mighty fine job of that greenhouse.
Thank you very much.
Looks good. The shading's in there, protecting plants from the sun that we've suddenly got. And the greenhouse vent is open, of course, which is important. You've got to get the airflow in the greenhouse, even in the winter on warm days. Keep the airflow going. The carpet's exuding the moisture levels.
Yeah, it'd be nice if it had been blue though, but...
well, yeah, never mind that. I would actually probably not use them at all. I'd probably use something like this if you can, which is the clay granules, which does equally as good a job and just looks a little bit better, I think.
Yeah.
And this is expanded clay. It lets the moisture out slowly.
Right.
And of course, perfect for the bottom of the greenhouse or your staging.
Yeah.
Now, we spoke about the maintenance of these plants. Now, in a couple of years, the orchids will need repotting. They don't want to go in too big a pot, generally speaking, otherwise it can inhibit the flowers. Now, we saw this earlier on in the programme, which in my mind looks quite amusing. If you look inside, the only bit of compost you can see is probably a little bit of bark right in the middle. But surprisingly enough, old Cymbidium is quite happy.
Yeah, it looks very healthy.
It's amazing, isn't it? So as long as you feed these plants, they can survive in a small pot, but this one, I think, is taking the mick a little bit too much and needs to go into something about that size. Just about an inch or so bigger all the way around is fine. And I'm even going to be a bit brutal with this and cut a third of these roots off to really keep the roots restricted.
Will that not damage the plant doing that?
Well, not at all. It gives it a bit of a shock and encourages it to flower. So we need to hack off about that much of this plant. Use a sharp knife, cut it through neatly, and we'll repot it in just a minute. I'll let you finish that off if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you.
Now, the Phalaenopsis here, this is a plant that really needs free drainage. It's a tree-growing epiphytic plant, in other words, that lives with the tree but doesn't actually take anything from it. Now the roots are quite open, and it doesn't actually have too much root system there at all. And if we look here, this is all that's supporting this plant. It just lives off moisture and the fine particles of rotting leaves and so on. Now what I want to do with this one is to repot it here in this open basket, and I'll stop the bark falling out and make it look a bit nicer as well. How are you getting on with that, Chris?
Yep, still there.
Going
yeah.
well, good. I'm using this sphagnum moss. A bit like a hanging basket for your bedding plants. You line the basket with this. Then you get special orchid compost. You can even use just straightforward bark chips. This is the stuff you'll buy. It's a slightly finer mix. It's got charcoal in there, all sorts of things, but very little, if any, fertiliser, which is the thing you've got to have for your orchids. Now we just fill that in there, just a tiny bit. It's amazing what they'll live off. Another thing with orchids is give them a lot of water, but infrequently. So they want to get a little bit on the dry side before you water them again. So I've just made a little nest of bark in there. And that's all it's going to need before I put the plant in. Now carefully tease those roots into that lot.
Is the water temperature critical when you're doing these plants?
It's important to use similar temperature to where the plants are actually living.
Yeah.
And if possible, Chris, use rainwater at all times.
Right.
Because it's much purer than tap water.
Right.
And the plant's going to be much happier with that. How are you getting on with your side there?
Yep, just chopped off and ready to
go?
plant up there.
Now all you need to do here is obviously firm this Phalaenopsis onto this basket so it doesn't fall over. And the new roots will soon get into there. Give that a good watering in a minute. Now the one you've got there, all we need to do, put a bit of compost in the bottom. There we are. It's going to be very happy in there. Try and get this down just a little bit so it's just below the level of the pot. So I'll remove a bit of that. Okay, Chris, fill in a bit round there. Now, it's such a massive plant group, Chris. It's difficult to go over it all in one day, but hopefully we've helped you out a bit.
You certainly have, and thank you very much for that.
That's all.
The only thing is, where do I go from here now? I mean,
well, the best thing for you really is to go to the Sheffield Orchid Society. They supplied us with most of these plants. And if you're at home, any collecting of plants is best to go to local groups and they can give you all the information you need.
Oh, that'd be terrific.
All you need to do now is to put that in the bottom of the greenhouse for a couple of weeks out in the sun.
Thank you very much.
That's all. If you want to grow orchids at home, just remember a few good pointers. The ideal thing is to create their own environment in a separate greenhouse. And things to think about, first of all, ventilation. It's important to get a good airflow around your plants, even on mild days in the winter time. Now, all the plants we looked at today need good humidity, at least 70 or 80%. Now, you can use a humidity meter to test this. And the good ways of getting that, use wet carpets or expanded clay granules. Now, the heat is really important, as most orchids shouldn't really fall much below about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, except for things like cymbidiums, which can take fairly cool conditions. Now, if your greenhouse is in a sunny position, make sure you shade heavily, because the worst thing that orchids can suffer is too much heat. And when repotting your orchids, make sure you know which ones they are, whether they're epiphytic, they grow on trees, or terrestrial, grow on the ground. Now, use a very free-draining compost, lots of bark, and of course you can use sphagnum moss as well. Try to use rainwater if you can, and feeding about once every 4 weeks with a very diluted tomato food. It's amazing when you start digging deep into the history of a place such as Chatsworth, and such a typical English establishment has such links with an exotic plant like the orchid. See you next time.
From Brighton Organic Gardens, all you could possibly want to know about vegetables tomorrow, including the history of the humble but versatile potato. Anthony Henn at 9:30 on Thursday here on Discovery Home and Leisure.
The house, in association with B&Q.
Lots of decorators, mate, I'll tell you, Joe. Well, Joe, let me tell you about the